Cory Sandhagen, the UFC's greatest content creator, also a pretty good bantamweight, taking on Rob Font this weekend in Nashville. I saw you on Instagram showing off your hotel room. It's always, I mentioned this to you, I mean, there's no better feeling than walking into a hotel room and having a separate bedroom from the sitting area.
Yeah, definitely. I think you know, I, the UFC does a great job, man. As much as sometimes I don't really see as often in the media how awesome this UFC staff is, and just some of the hotels we stay in are real awesome. But yeah, the UFC does a good job, and they definitely did a good job this time because I love staying in nice hotels.
Yeah, so you have a nice view of the city as well. Have you been to Nashville before?
I've been to Nashville once to watch when they were actually here last time, when the UFC was here last time. I went. I forget who was fighting that night, but a couple of my teammates were, so I came out and watched them. But yeah, that's the only time that I've been here is to watch fights, and now I guess to participate.
You had an opponent change recently. Rob Font was supposed to be facing Song Yadong. You were supposed to be facing Umar Nurmagomedov. Both opponents fell out. It ended up working out well. I was worried you were going to fall off this card rather. How much of a concern was it for you before that was determined?
Yeah, I mean, I was really nervous. I really wanted to fight. I was feeling real good. Training for 3 months, you definitely want to actually have some type of, fight at the end of that. So, yeah, I'm real grateful. It worked out real nice because when they told me that Umar had to pull out, I was like, well, literally everyone else that I would fight is taken. And then they told me Song had a little something going on, so Font it is.
Tell me about Rob and what he does well. You're always very, vocal about the strengths of your opponents, and I'd love to hear what your assessment of Rob Font is.
Yeah, Font does a really good job. I mean, his biggest weapon is his pressure. He just puts like nonstop pressure on people. I know that he's a really active fighter, which is my style too. So, yeah, he puts a lot of pressure on people. He seems to sometimes overwhelm them, either physically, sometimes mentally. I notice too, where when you're getting that many punches thrown at you in a round, sometimes it can be like really stimulating. And I know that because that's what I try to do to people too. I think that Rob Font makes mistakes in how safe he is when he is putting all of that pressure. I think that I do it in a lot more safer of a fashion, but I think that that's Rob Font's biggest weapon is his pressure. Of course, his jab is really good too. He doesn't telegraph his punches much, and yeah, he's a good fighter.
I heard you on the Joe Rogan Experience talking about fighting Chito Vera and how that was probably the most dialed in you've been leading up to a fight. Has that been one of the biggest challenges of your career? Is obviously we know how good of a fighter you are from a technical standpoint and also just with your creativity, but having that, yourself dialed in mentally like that on fight night, has that been the biggest challenge of your career? And now do you feel like you're there at a point where you're going to be able to perform in that fashion in all of your subsequent fights?
Yeah, I think that that's a challenge for everyone's career. To be honest, I think that I'm like I think a lot. Like I'm a bit of like when something happens, I try to figure out why it happened. I think that I maybe do that to an obsessive point, but that like that's what's helped me become who I am, anyways. But I also think that I'm a pretty self-aware guy, so I kind of know what's going on inside of me for as much as a human being can. But I think that me having that quality has helped me really understand how I can go into fights and peak and bring out the best me and even a better version of me that I've ever seen. So yeah, I think that that's a big challenge for everyone. But I think that because I think I maybe do a little bit more, or at least from what I've seen in my career, I do a little bit more thinking and analysis of the internal piece of fighting than I think some of my, coworkers. But yeah, I think that that's a challenge for everyone, and it's something that I'll never get arrogant about having because that's how you start to lose it. But I do think that that is something that I'm trying to perfect now because I do think that my technical skills and my work ethic and all of that has always been there. So I just, you got to figure out that other piece, and I think I'm figuring it out some.
Was training for Umar Nurmagomedov harder than training for Rob Font from a mental standpoint? And I say this with no disrespect to Rob, but we don't really have the full body of work for Umar yet. We don't really know exactly what he's capable of. And when you have the Nurmagomedov lineage and you have the kind of hype that he had where he's built up to be kind of this big monster, Whereas with Rob Font, we've seen kind of the body of work. We've seen where he's most dangerous. Was that a difficult thing to prepare for with Umar?
Yeah, his style is really unique. I keep saying this about the Russian wrestler archetype, like the Dagestani guys. I mean, they're of course really phenomenal wrestlers, but I think what they've done more than anything in the sport is figure out how to hold guys down better. I think that in American and traditional wrestling combat sports, once you get your 2 points by sitting someone to their butt or taking them down or whatever, you get your points. Past that, all you're really doing is control time as far as controlling them from turtle, which isn't. I mean, it's kind of a typical spot in MMA, but not as like it's just different. So what the Dagestani guys have done is they've just figured out how to hold people down better, and I was really and they have a unique style of wrestling to them too. Of course, like the types of shots that they take, it's super energy efficient too, for the most part, and yeah, so they do things. Long story short, they do things pretty uniquely, and getting ready for that unique type of wrestling style was fun and challenging, and brought out a really good side of me. And then also Umar has like a very unique striking style too, which was fun for me to try to figure out how to break down and what tools to use, how to move, what space to leave, all of these things. So that was fun. The change up with Font is definitely stylistically very, very different than an Umar. But a Rob Font is someone that I'm pretty familiar with fighting in the past. I've fought that type of pressure fighter a lot. Rob does it really good. He has his own little unique things that he does that are different than other people, of course. But as far as like the pressure guy, the guy that's going to move forward, I fight that guy really well. And yeah, I'm glad that it was like a flip from Umar to Rob and not a Rob to a Umar, because Umar's style is much more unique and unorthodox.
When you look at how fights are scored, you talk about the Dagestani style of wrestling and how they're able to control. With control not being that much of a factor in terms of the scoring criteria, obviously you have to use that control to gain damage. Do you like that that's the way that the scoring criteria is structured so that fighters can't just hold someone down and win a fight that way for the most part?
Yeah, that's kind of a difficult question to answer, only because it feels like we're in this in between piece of where the criteria is supposed to be damage, but traditionally things get scored on control. There's kind of like this in between space that we're in my opinion, right now in MMA, where you're going to get some judges that are going to be more on one end, and then other judges that are going to uphold and withstand the rules on the one side, as far as damage goes. And I think that because we are in this in between time, you're getting guys that don't know what type of strategy to go in with, whether it should be, hey, if I just hold this guy down the entire time, then I will win, or if it's a close round and I hold him for 30 seconds, then I win. Some guys are, banking on that, and then other guys are like, well, okay, if I don't do damage, then I'm not winning. If it's a close round and I have the guy in a control spot, but I'm not doing anything for 30 seconds, then am I losing? Am I winning? So it's kind of this like weird in between piece. I do like the way that it's trending as far as the MMA judging is going. I do like that it's trending in a direction of damage, because in my opinion, that's what fighting is. It's not wrestling, which is, a lot of control stuff, but fighting is about doing damage to the person. So I think it's trending in the right direction, but it is kind of in this weird space right now where I think fighters and coaches and people that have to compete in the sport don't know like how much to weigh which one more than the other, which is difficult. But yeah.
Usually I'm pretty in tune with how fights are judged, and after your last fight, I was on Sports Center, and before we went on with the anchor goes, I think Cory won all 5 rounds. I said, I think he won 4 or 5, but there were 3 competitive rounds there. You'd have to take real liberties to give Chito Vera all 3 of those rounds, but it could happen, and lo and behold, it ends up being a split decision. So going back and watching that fight, are you able to rationalize that scorecard at all?
No, I think that was like ridiculous, honestly. If Cheeto would have won that fight, it would have said a lot about the way that fighting is just scored in general. I don't think that Cheeto was leading the dance almost ever. except for on a couple occasions where he would like he did a couple good things, but for the most part, I think that I was the one controlling him. Maybe not with like scoring punches as hard as I can, but I was the guy that was leading that dance, and I think that it was very obvious to anyone that was watching. So no, I mean, like you can always make an argument. Usually, sometimes you can't, but you can almost always make an argument for someone winning a round or losing a round, especially if it's like fairly close, like 60-40 or even 70-30. But no, I think in that fight, that would have been absolute absurdity if he had won that fight, if one other judge would have gave it to him. So, uh, I don't know if that really changes my approach too much because honestly, I think that that guy's just a really horrible judge, and I'm not going to change a lot of things that I do just because one guy is really bad at his job.
Yeah, I was confused by that scorecard. I mean, like I said, I was able to somewhat rationalize that there were three competitive rounds. And when I say competitive, I don't mean close but competitive. Competitive means, he was putting up a fight, right? Like, I think that there were two very clear rounds for you in that fight. And then the other three, it was like, they're not coin flip rounds, but they're competitive rounds. It's if you want to take liberties and maybe give Chito one of those rounds, I understand. Three of those rounds, I think you're kind of pushing it probably a little bit too far, in my opinion. And usually I am able to rationalize a lot of these scorecards. That was a bit of a head scratcher for me.
Yeah, I agree. I try to like understand things from other people's perspectives too. So yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I definitely think I won like at least four, probably five of those rounds. But yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying because predator, I have to be like, huh, like, should I view it from that guy's perspective? But at the end of the day, at least with that fight, not in all of my fights, but in that fight in particular, it was just like I'm not gonna change too much because I think that that guy is just really wrong, and I'm not gonna feel like I'm doing something wrong because someone else I think is just not good at their job.
Last question for you, and it's not really fight related. I watched an interview with you earlier today where you talked about how much you love music, art, movies, things where you can see that people are really pouring themselves into something. Outside of the world of fighting, who is somebody who really impresses you?
Really impresses me. I really like well, as far as music goes, I really like J. Cole, and I really like a guy named Daniel Caesar. I think that they make like really beautiful music. As far as like what other types of art am I into? I really like I really like some other fighters at the like in fighting it's a bit of a different art because it's improv, we don't get to like sit down and spend like an hour making a masterpiece. Like we kind of have to do it like in the moment. So that's kind of what makes sports and fighting really awesome. But I think that that kind of gets balanced a little bit in having like really balanced out styles in fighting. I think that techniques are cool, but I think what's cooler is when people are really good strategists. And I think when they have like really balanced styles as far as striking, grappling, being aggressive, being defensive, being elusive, attacking. I think that that's really beautiful to me. That I see as an art, and that's why, that's what I'm striving for in MMA is to just create a super balanced and really awesome looking style of fighting, without getting like too much on the artsy end. As far as like a Yair Rodriguez who has like a really cool, looking style, but isn't always the most efficient style in the world, and yeah, so I try to like shoot for efficiency and balance in my fighting style.
Well, you mentioned strategy. I don't know if you know this. Daniel Caesar is one heck of a chess player, apparently. I was going to pull my copy of Freudian to impress you, but it's on my shelf all the way over there, so I couldn't get to it on time. But I appreciate your time. Thank you for doing this, Cory. Always a pleasure. Main event yourself, Rob Font. Should be one hell of a match in the bantamweight division. Thank you so much for doing this.
Cool, thanks, Aaron. I'll talk to you later, man.